It's time for us to start this session dealing with a roundtable discussion of Richard Bushman's award-winning book, Rough Stone Rolling. And I'm Newell Bringhurst, and I'm in the role of kind of moderator, kind of traffic controller, whatever you want to call me. Our next panelist is Dan Vogel. And Dan Vogel and I also have some connective roots, kind of the California connection. He was born in Los Angeles, but that didn't warp him too bad because then he moved to Orange County, which maybe, that kind of had some interesting effects on him. But he got his BA degree from California State University, Long Beach. And he's an independent scholar. He has managed to accumulate an extremely impressive publication record. He is, among his most notable works, Indian Origins of the Book of Mormon, published in 1986, Religious Seekers and the Advent of Mormonism, 1988, edited American Apocrypha, and one of the most impressive body of work that he's put together is a collection of early Mormon documents, his 5-volume early Mormon documents. And most recently, his mammoth biography of Joseph Smith, The Making of a Prophet, which was award-winning like Richard Bushman's. It received the John Whitmer Best Book Award. It received the MHA Best Biography Award. He is currently editing a critical edition of volumes 1 to 6 of the History of the Church. He currently lives in Westerville, Ohio, with his wife Margie and 2 dogs. Dan Vogel.
Greetings, audience. I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk about Richard's biography. In Believing History, Richard warned that the unbelieving reader wants an explanation of Joseph Smith that will not be forthcoming in his study because the believing side of his mind does not find that explanation plausible. And in the preface to Rough Stone Rolling, he frankly admitted that he is a believing historian who cannot hope to rise above these battles or pretend nothing personal is at stake. For me, the most interesting parts of the biography were the situations where Richard's personal commitments were most at stake, where Richard, the professional historian, struggled with Richard, the devout LDS patriarch. Richard is quick to state that pure objectivity is impossible when dealing with a character as controversial as Joseph Smith. But we all know that pure objectivity is impossible, period. And so I will confess that I found Richard's analysis most convincing when he was in agreement with mine. And and somewhat less persuasive when he disagreed. I was pleasantly surprised, for example, to discover that there was significant interpretive agreement, especially about Smith family dynamics. Among the best parts of the book for me were Richard's discussion of Smith family religious conflict, his acknowledgement of Joseph Sr.'s drinking problem and emotional reticence, his description of Joseph Jr. as family healer, unifier, and restorer of patriarchy, and his recognition that treasure-seeking lore about guardian spirits may have made it easier for Joseph Sr. to believe his son's fabulous story about an angel in gold plates. Yet in these and other discussions, I found curious lapses. One significant lapse, for example, is Richard's failure to acknowledge Joseph Sr.'s sustained belief in universal salvation, as William Smith described, and the probable role it played in the religious rift the Smith family experienced in the years following Alvin's death. However, I was pleased that Richard had acknowledged the presence of anti-universalist rhetoric in the Book of Mormon, as well as the perplexing reversal of Smith's March 1830 revelation, which in Richard's words explain that despite the scriptural phrases like eternal torment and endless punishment, torment for sins would be temporary, just as the Universalists taught. But I was disappointed that he skipped over a discussion of the obvious implications of this revelation, specifically the idea that Joseph Smith's God intentionally uses misleading language that it might work upon the hearts of the children of men. In the preface, Richard cites Karen Armstrong's biography of Muhammad as a model for his approach to Joseph Smith. Armstrong's book has been acclaimed more for its attempt to help Westerners understand Muhammad and Islam from the perspective of believers, which Richard calls the irenic viewpoint, than for its critical analysis of sources and insights about the man. I suspect Richard's scholarship is better than Armstrong's. Even so, his biography is open to similar complaints. Like Armstrong, Richard wants to treat Smith's accounts of his visions and revelations as if they actually occurred. By doing so, he believes he has unimpeded access to his mind and is able to think as Smith thought. Richard is aware that an irenic approach to Smith necessarily involves thinking like a believer and setting aside the contradictions and incongruities in the prophet's record. In this regard, Richard has done a good job of explaining the Joseph Smith of faith, at least as held by a majority of those who currently call him prophet, even if there are serious questions about its correspondence to the Joseph Smith of history. The irenic approach, in my view, cannot deal with the complexities of Joseph Smith or his claims. Unlike Muhammad's revelations, the Book of Mormon is susceptible to historical testing. If the historian decides it has no historical basis, then Smith's claims about the angel and gold plates cannot be taken at face value. Moreover, how should we handle his revelations when some of them advocate the use of inspired deception or misdirection? How do we treat his account of visions when within the same history he deceptively handles his concurrent activities as a treasure seer? Is it wise to adopt an uncritical approach with a man who, according to Richard, believes that any moral rule, any common sense limitation on any human constraint could be overthrown by a revelation? Isn't our access to such a mind impeded by our own unwillingness to deal with the contradictions and incongruities? The shortcomings of the irenic approach are apparent in Richard's handling of Joseph Smith's first vision story, or stories. While Richard recognizes a shift in meaning between Smith's 1832 and 1838 accounts, from a story about personal conversion to one that became the founding story of the one true church, he tries to harmonize rather than acknowledging the contradictions and incongruities in the prophet's record. He begins with the speculation that in 1832 Smith abbreviated the experience, and as Joseph became more confident, more details came out. This theory controls what is then quoted and what is left out. The irenic approach cannot tolerate contradictions and incongruities because they raise doubts about the notion of having unimpeded access to Joseph Smith's mind, and the propriety of treating his accounts of visions and revelations as if they actually occurred becomes questionable. The irenic approach also runs into trouble with Joseph Smith's misrepresentations about his early activities as a treasure seer. Contrary to his promise to put all inquirers after truth into possession of the facts in truth and righteousness as they transpired, Smith misrepresented his involvement in money digging as a one-time event in 1825 as one of Josiah Stoll's hired hands. In fact, however, by his own admission elsewhere, He was the leader of many such operations over a period of at least 3 years, locating the places to dig with a seer stone. Skipping over Smith's prevarication, Richard offers the following apologetic. With Joseph's realization of himself as a prophet, the rearrangement of memory began. When Joseph tells his story from 1828 on, his search for treasure as a boy became an irrelevant diversion of his youth. Treasure seeking did not lead to the person he had become. His true story began with his search for a church and his plea for forgiveness. Of course, the rearrangement of memory was quite intentional. Smith decided to counter the many reports put in circulation by what he considered were evil designing persons by putting into circulation his own false report. Whether or not Smith regarded his treasure seeking as an irrelevant diversion of his youth, he obviously didn't want us deciding that for ourselves. Acknowledging such deliberate deception makes it difficult to justify the uncritical trust the irenic approach wants to extend to Joseph Smith and his version of events. Regarding Smith's bringing the plates home wrapped in his frock, Richard acknowledges that for most readers, the plates are beyond belief, a phantasm, yet the Mormon sources accept them as fact. Richard mentions the counter-explanations offered by unbelieving biographers, namely me and Brody, but dismisses them as speculation and fabrications, and then argues, since the people who knew Joseph best treat the plates as fact, a skeptical analysis lacks evidence. A series of surmises replaces a documented narrative. However, because the plates were covered, the statements of Smith's family and friends are only evidence of their trust. Nothing more. In short, their testimonies cannot be used to eliminate speculation altogether, because they are themselves speculations. Moreover, Richard should have recognized that my discussion of the plates did not begin with some wild speculation about how Joseph Smith could have made plates out of tin, but rather, as I explained in my introduction, with the assumption that the Book of Mormon is not real history. Thus, to the extent that one believes the evidence points to a non-historical Book of Mormon, it also points to something other than real gold plates under the cloth. The two are inseparably connected. Deciding to tell the story from the point of view of believers, specifically the one currently enforced through threat of excommunication by the Utah-based LDS Church, is one thing. But presenting that point of view as less speculative than that held by skeptics is another. Richard continues, incredible as the plates were, hunting for deception can be a distraction. It throws us off the track of Joseph the prophet. Not necessarily. It might throw us off the track that leads directly to Salt Lake City and their definition of prophet, but as I have argued, it may very well point us in another direction, on another track that leads to a more complex understanding of Joseph Smith and a different definition of prophet. While I have focused on some of the drawbacks of the irenic approach, I nevertheless think Richard has made a valuable contribution to the study of Joseph Smith's life. In addition to helping non-Mormons understand what Joseph Smith means to most believers, Richard's biography also provides an entree into some of the competing views and controversies among current interpreters. Despite some reservation, I enthusiastically welcome Richard's biography to the unending dialogue about Joseph Smith and our search for both genuine consensus and legitimate disagreement. Thank you.